In Joshua chapter 7, as Joshua sent 3,000 men into the little village of Ai to scout it out and take it over on their way to the promised land, their 3,000 men were just routed. A couple of dozen of them were killed. And then as they made their way back to camp and began to tell everyone else what had happened, there's a pretty vivid description of how they felt. It said their hearts melted and became like water. They had no ability to hold on to anything or even to function. And I bet if I were to ask you to identify a time in your life when your heart has felt the same way, you'd be able to identify something. Something that happened in the past that you can't forget. Something that happened in the past that has consequences right now in the present, you still feel it. Something that's happening in the present right now. It's making your heart feel like it has melted, like you are entirely weak and discouraged. Or maybe it's something related to what you're afraid is coming, or to what you're pretty certain is going to happen. There are a lot of different things in life that can make us feel the same way. Like we have hearts that have just melted, and they have no ability to function or hold anything good ever again. And the reason why there are things like that do that to our hearts, the reason why our hearts feel that way is easy enough to understand. It was the same thing that was true for those Israelites, because the things that made them feel that way, they were right in front of them. They couldn't miss them. They were coming after them. They were killing their friends and their family. There was a threat right in front of their eyes, and they couldn't miss it. Which means that with those threats right in front of their eyes, it was just a little bit, or maybe a lot bit harder to remember some really important things. A little bit harder to remember what their eyes saw when the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, and the day that they walked straight in, when God gave them a victory that many of them never really saw coming. It was maybe a little bit harder to remember things from way back when their journey in the wilderness began, when God set them free from over 400 years of Egyptian slavery miraculously, with plagues and miracles that just numbed Pharaoh and compelled the man who never wanted to let go of his slave workers, compelled him to just kick them out because he never wanted to see them again. And then when he changed his mind, well, the Israelites could have remembered the day that they were standing in front of the water and they just split right open because God separated the waters and they walked through on dry ground. They could have remembered. On that day when the people of Ai were coming after them, they could have remembered how God saved them again and again and again, and how God was merciful to them again and again and again, and how God was still with them, even that day, even when they were afraid and their hearts were melting. Maybe it was hard for them to remember, but they could have, just like you can. You maybe don't have the same experiences to be able to think back to that the Israelites would have. Maybe you've never walked across the sea on dry ground. Maybe you've never been set free from Egyptian slavery. Maybe God has never rained down manna from heaven in order to feed your hungry belly. But he did put his son on a cross. And that son was dead. And then on Easter morning, his tomb was empty, reminding us all just what kind of God we have with us. Whether it's difficult to see him or if it's easy. We have one who stands tall and victorious over everything, and not just for his sake, but for yours. And He knows. It's sometimes hard for us to see that, especially when we have to live by faith. But we always have the right to, because He's always alive. He already died to bring us into God's family. And both those things will always, forever be true. And because they will, your heart doesn't have to melt anymore. You can hold the peace that comes from a Jesus who knows how to get us through. Rest well tonight, my friends.